Thomas Holliday. You all know him, I think. He's been here for 8 years at Newbridge, and he was born in 1942 in Easton in Maryland. And he studied with the writing seminars of Eliot Coleman at Johns Hopkins. And he, upon graduation, I just noticed that, anyway, he began and worked with the military and with the CIA Phoenix program, and he'll tell us all about that. He has written 10 books, which you can purchase on Amazon, and they're all there, and he's going to tell us about the books as well. And so I think we should go straight in to his presentation, and then we should hopefully have a vigorous discussion afterwards about the books and about him. So let's go.
Okay. I'm not too good at speeches. When I was growing up, there were only 3 careers open to you down in the country there. One was being a preacher, one was being a politician, and one was working in a gas station for the tourists. And I didn't really want to be a preacher, and I didn't have the money to be a politician, so I went north. All Southern boys are told early on, go north and make some money. So that's what I did. Did everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Good.
So anyway, that's the story at the beginning. Now this paper I wrote was about writing believable fiction. I spent a lot of time with writers over the years who write fiction, wonderful stories, but they've never been there, they've never done anything, and you can tell it right away from their stories. They just don't know anything. However, they're much better writers than I am, and as a result, they usually sell a lot more books. But the upshot of the whole thing is, you have to get experience gained from real people in the place where the story action of the story takes place. It requires imagination to recognize a story from what you've learned. If someone reads your fiction and then asks you if the story really happened, you did something right as a storyteller. On all my books, I do a beta test in my mind with my friends to see if they chuckle at the humor and have sympathy for the hero against the bad guys. I had a head start. Down there in the country, I grew up in a home of storytellers. Both parents came from families who had settled my home area in the colonial days, and they had cousins from all walks of life. With my mother as a teacher of English, I met other children, both wealthy and poor. With my father, I carried his photography gear on his shoots, learning the families, their losses of fires, and their happiness at weddings. I also helped my uncle on his farm, learning crops, especially learning to plow straight, and of course, the animals. The imagination drives the pen of a storyteller. It's key. My imagination was stoked at an early age by my grandmother, who was given the name Melusina by her German mother. Any of you all from Eastern Europe would probably know the story of Melusina. It was very famous. She was a legendary, beautiful princess of European mythology, and her story was picked up as the Lady of the Lakes in England. Grandmother related the heroic tales of my Scottish and American ancestors. She described the beginning of the Hollyday, spelled Aliday, a tribe of border Scotland's Badlands in Annandale. Its bandit warrior members from all countries, kind of like our Western Badlands was in the last century, 2 centuries ago. They had Scots, Vikings, Celts, Irish, Jews, Egyptians, and Nubians, all races, all religions. The Romans and later the Normans called these brigands Hollyday, which in their Latin meant free people who hold their own land, which is very rare in that world. I memorized the handed down story of my namesake, Thomas Halliday, who fought alongside his uncle, Sir William Wallace, against the English army trying to subdue Scotland. You all seen Braveheart. The guy with the big red beard, that's, I'm sure, my ancestor. I memorized the handed down story, and a later grandson, Thomas Holliday, by then it become more rationalized, led a mercenary company of archers against the French at Agincourt, coming home with the famous V sign like that, which illustrates the enemy had not cut off their fore and middle bow fingers to defeat them. Later became Winston Churchill's thing. My grandmother also retold the modern story of her uncle, Juan Tripp, who came to visit her from New York and founded Pan American Airlines with its world-circling 4-engine China Clippers. I'd go outside and scan the skies for seaplanes. Naturally, when I got older, I researched all these tales and found that Holliday Hill still existed, but without its tower, and with a nearby valley called the Devil Beef Tub, where they hid their stolen English cattle. Now, I enrolled at Johns Hopkins, courtesy of the Procter & Gamble Company. After graduation, I volunteered with the Army Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, which is the old name for it, Vietnam, where I worked in 2 Corps on enemy identification, the forerunner of the CIA U.S. Army Phoenix program to disrupt Viet Cong assassination squads. When I returned home in May '68, I began civil rights programs with my friends, following the burning of 17 buildings in Cambridge by the black leader H. Rap Brown near my home in Maryland. He was called Rap, his middle name, because he spoke as a preacher with a kind of a rapping song, which later became rap music. And that's where he came from. That's who he was. I received congratulations from the Office of Economic Opportunity for work well done. Later overseas experiences in the Third World, conducting export trade missions for the US government, taught me more about foreign cultures and often brought me to areas of terrorist activity. Now, my work in humorous illustration, developed in my college years, grew into magazine sales and books of nature cartoons. My life outside my regular work was besieged with drawing boards. My wife had a time with the things. Still, my writing journals grew thick with notes for stories. My fiction finally took its best form when I developed my series of Chesapeake novels, the River Sunday Romance Mystery Series. These books were named for the early River Sunday stories and characters that I scribbled in my journals while learning writing at Johns Hopkins. Writers always have journals. Thick things. They jot down the stories. More adventures and characters had come along from my years of business and travel in the States and around the world. The series codified these notes into stories of good and evil and a continuous fight against mysterious enemies. I imported these characters to my fictional town. They loved and fought in a Chesapeake world my storyteller mind knew well, and imagined as a microcosm of America. In 2003, Slave Graves was published digitally by my own company and copyrighted. It was sold in the Amazon Marketing Network, among other vendors like Barnes & Noble and Apple, in the new and popular ebook marketplace. Paperbacks follow, and then finally audio. Hardcovers seem to be a declining track out of the market as bookstores fought to keep business. The big publishers stuck with hardcover books, and they still do, but they're expensive to market. In this first ebook, drafted from notes first begun at Johns Hopkins and before, an archaeologist, a former Vietnam veteran, faces murder by modern townspeople determined to hide his uncovering their colonial ancestors' massacre of a shipment of slave American men, women, and children. In slavery days, children were prized as less likely to be sick. This book still reigns as a winner in the Amazon book rankings. It draws heavily on my work with local Black racism and, of course, my own experiences in war. In 2007, Magnolia Gods was printed. At the beginning of the Cold War, a soldier is betrayed and named a traitor, but years later, his family is still trying to prove his innocence. A friend of mine's family had undergone treason accusations because of the McCarthy era. Also, when I was a freshman at Johns Hopkins, I was allowed to attend as a freshman Owen Lattimore's overcrowded graduate lectures on growing freedom in China and the Far East. I will never forget him, another accused of communism, complete with mustache, sitting in his little Gilman Hall attic office, where he gave me Su Yan's Mandarin language book. 2009 welcomed my third book in my River Sunday series, Power of Racer. A successful Black race driver hides for years from a sheriff's murder charge. This novel used a backdrop of my childhood with my small outboard boat and a Black mechanic whom me and my buddies loved as a pal. His shop was a favorite hangout, talking boats and engines, near his large water tank for outboard testing. This book draft sat in my journals long before my Hopkins years. In 2010 came Gold, my first science fiction effort. Johns Hopkins prompted my love of science, although I was never a scientist to Hopkins standards. I should say the science in my novels requires months of correct research for each book, especially this one, which depends so much on early American history. The location of an ancient treasure in a Chesapeake harbor town disappears with the heart attack of its finder, an elderly priest. The town is suddenly overwhelmed by prospectors who will do anything to find the gold. My childhood was filled with tales of long ago pirates repairing their 17th century ships in the numerous rivers around my town. As a child, I kept an eye out on beaches for lost doubloons. As a matter of fact, I taught my children to do the same on Maine beaches when they were little. Not that they knew what a doubloon was. In 2012, Terrorflower was published. Fanatic Nigerian and German terrorists hide on a Chesapeake farm to firebomb a nearby city. My experience with terrorists came not only from Vietnam, where they blew up a whole bunch of my fellow intelligence officers when they were just at dinner, a little boy with a bicycle and a bomb, but later witnessing the terror of a Gaddafi attack on our Lagos embassy, where Gaddafi had planned to attack the embassy by boat, and we stopped him. In 2013, I finished China Jewel, a modern race between new tall ships across the Pacific leads to storms, murders, a past history of a stolen Chinese emerald, and romance. From childhood, I had heard of the famous clipper ships built nearby to race to China for tea purchases. With the coming of the modern Whitbread ocean races sponsored in England in 1970, the races with fast yachts on the old ocean routes began. I had also written of a local clipper built nearby in 1831, and even sponsored an underwater search off Staten Island for the remains of her wreck in 1990. Another one of these wrecks was found off of California. It was also built in Baltimore about the same time. As a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass worked on this other boat called the Frolic. Of course, with my cousin Juan Tripp founding American Airways, I included a resurrected Martin 130 China Clipper seaplane as a hero's vehicle to follow the race. My next book, published in 2015, was Easter Sunday. A boy's search for a war relic gets him buried with little hope of rescue in a swamp mud cave as a storm flood arrives. Personal love of the swamps of the Chesapeake and the animals therein prodded me to write of these waters. My boyhood knowledge of muskrats led me to star them as heroic and creatures of old legends. The characters of some at the rescue were related to radio amateurs, fellow Harley-Davidson riders, Black political leaders, firemen, and women I have known for years. Power came along in 2017. In this second science fiction novel, a secret social media cult attacks the national electric grid and holds an oilman's daughter as hostage. Growing energy costs and anti-fossil fuel movements form the background in my imagination for a cult promising free energy to its hordes of international fans as a result of its violence. The heroine of this book is a clever veterinarian who owns a locket featuring a three-legged dog. Some of you animal friends they understand that. Warboat was a result of my studio's work in 2019. A grandson undercovers the true story of a Chesapeake town's home-built warboat fighting against a Nazi U-boat on war patrol, raiding its shores before the World War was declared in 1941. This was a story my imagination longed to tell of modern descendants decades after the American Revolution. The book portrays the ingenuity and bravery of small-town volunteers fighting with outmoded guns for freedom from a foreign oppressor. As in the fight for our country, there were spies from the enemy. The latest of my books came out last year, 2020. The increasing CO2 climate crisis causes oxygen-starved, hungry, tiny ants from deep in the earth to come out of their nests to attack and eat larger animals, including humans, worldwide. It's another foray into science fiction, telling a story of the possible outcome of a climate crisis and showing that the enemy can be the trillions of tiny creatures living on the planet that are threatened by human selfishness. As in so many crises, when the attack comes to their own village, the regular people are left to their own devices, wherein the government can provide no viable defense. All my work for the rescue of wildlife against human predation led to this book. So, I must say, I am hard at work with 3 new books for my fans in various stages of completion. I also haven't forgotten my love of drawing humorous cartoons and have another cartoon and family-oriented book on my drawing board. I have updated and moved more cartoons into the art world of Cafe Press, where my popular Nature's Viewpoint garden animals and flowers speak out their humor and wisdom on millennial porcelain and clothing. It's a big t-shirt market. So that's about it for the old guy. My Hopkins professors would be variously pleased and not pleased that I didn't become a famous doctor, but anyway. Procter & Gamble financed the liberal arts, so I went that way. So I guess we open it up to questions. Anybody got it?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for that. I mean, it's an amazing story, and obviously there's a lot that we have learned from what you've told us. I'm really intrigued by your experience with intelligence and so on, and also with the dealing with oh, why am I blocking? Right. Okay. Well, Prue's saying I should let other people speak, but anyway, I will. But with terrorists, and that you've actually experienced that in real time, and I wonder if you want to make any comments about that.
Well, I have to say first off that being in intelligence, when I was in the middle of the Tet Offensive, I remember looking out at the place we lived in. We were in civilian clothes out in a village. And I remember looking out at the Tet celebrations going in the street outside. And although we had in our desks information from some of the bad guys that they were planning something, I remember my intelligent comment, tonight they ought to start something with all these rockets going off. Of course they did, and we did smear them. We beat the hell out of them. Some say, and this is afterthoughts of many people who know that war, that the North Vietnamese, who wanted to take over the country anyway, decided that the best thing they could do, a la communists in Europe and everywhere else in the world, is get rid of the local leaders. That's what they did in Poland during World War II. Get rid of anybody who has any sense of local power. And then when they were all dead, they could just move in and take over the government, which is exactly what happened. We killed all the Viet Cong, 60-some thousand of them. So by the time the North Vietnamese army came in, when we left the country, there was no local leaders to oppose them. Some say the North Vietnamese ordered the Tet Offensive to get rid of the local Viet Cong. Anyway, so just to show you how unintelligent intelligence people can be, we had the Tet Offensive. As far as terrorists, I spent a lot of time being an American overseas and wondering whether I was going to get captured. I tried to play down my suit and stuff that I carried so they would think that I was very poor and not worth a ransom. And it worked. There were a lot of them around over there, I can tell you, in those days.
Peter.
Well, I want to get back to your book. Can you tell, do you use an agent, number one?
Well, agents were there were quite a few of them back in the Hopkins days. They got simpler and simpler, less and less. And quite frankly, what happened with agents, they're paid by the big publishers. There are less and less big publishers. I think there's only 5 of them now. And some of them are foreign owned.
Let me get back to the real question I was going to ask. Can you tell us the path you take from your idea from a book till it gets finally written and it's picked up by a publishing company?
Well, first of all, I never went the publishing route. I mean, like all young people starting out in the business, I could say that I probably sent as many copies of books out as the guy who writes the law stories, I forget the name. He did 28, I think, before he got a publisher, and it was a little publisher, and the book stank, didn't accomplish anything. Publishers are hard to get, and they think profit. And they also think the books that the publishers are selling. It's a big business. And if you don't write the kind of books that the publishers think will make money, you're pretty much out of luck. So if science fiction is selling and you write science fiction, hey, that's what you get. If you're crazy like me and you write about a little town in the Chesapeake and all these experiences I had and my crazy ideas about what's going on, pretty hard. But what saved me and thousands of writers is that by the time we had good, solid books written and experiences to write them in, it takes about 20, 30 years to develop that if you're not a particularly good writer, and I'm not. The internet had occurred, and Amazon had occurred. And what was the big savior of writing in this country was the ebook, which could be self-built, self-published for nothing. And all the money that you would have given to the publisher in were what I say, publishers sell your book, but when you go to a second edition, they usually come back and want their royalty back to help pay for the marketing. It's happened to friends of mine. So it's a net deal. It can be. You can keep that money for your own marketing. And that's where you get the reviews. And if you get the reviews, that gets you on the book rankings at Amazon. And if you get on the book rankings at Amazon, you sell more books. Selling a book on Amazon as an ebook, you make about as much money as you do on a paperback. Hardcover, as I do with the audio. Audio makes me the kind of money you would get in a hardcover. It's not as big because people don't spend money anymore. But they do spend a lot of money on ebooks. They can read them on their phone. So agents aren't as important anymore. Publishers aren't as important anymore. Amazon is very important.
Bob Weidenstein.
Yeah, Tom, what book would you recommend? What non-science book would you recommend for a book group that could create a lot of discussion?
Well, I go to my first book, Slave Graves. It has easily the best book ranking with Amazon.
What's the title of it?
Slave Graves.
All right, that's one question. And the other question is the model sailboat behind you the one you made at Newbridge?
No, that's a Chesapeake Bay log canoe.
Ah.
That model was made by a famous builder on Tillman Island and a friend of my great-grandfather. He gave it to my great-grandfather for my grandfather to sail as a toy. The reason he gave it to him was because he was a hero of the Confederate Army, which I know we're not allowed to talk about anymore, but down that part of the world, there was a lot of hero worship in the old days. People fought for their brothers. They all were brothers and cousins.
And I think you ought to tell everybody that your books, most of them are on the Kindle library, Newbridge Library Kindle edition.
Yes, absolutely. The paperbacks. I think they're all there. If they're not, let me know and I'll donate one to the library. I forget what books are in it. And I haven't seen my friend down there. She's having problems with her leg or waist or something in an operation. I haven't seen her down there and her little dog working in the library very much lately. But they're all up there on the counter. You go in and where you're sitting by the fireplace reading the paper. If you look over to the right, up about the third shelf, you'll see a stack of my books. I think actually I'm kind of honored because they're next to Faye's book on Germany or travel in Germany, and the writing of what's his name about my friend about a Jewish doctor in India.
Noah Gordon? No.
Noah, yeah, great book. So I'm quite honored to be up there with him. He's around. I don't know. I've heard he isn't around much anymore, but the virus has screwed us all up so much.
So, other questions?
Well, was it easy to sell your second and third book once you did part of the Sunday River series?
Yeah, they as you get into the books, you gain a fandom, let's say, the modern name for it. And they go through and they read the reviews. I'm lucky to have a pretty fair number of reviews on my books. These all come from readers. Many of the reviews on books are done by teams of reviewers, which are hired by the publishers, send out books, and they're paid for reviews. And then they put them on. So you get somebody in there with 10,000 reviews. That's usually done by mechanical means. But mine are all pretty much from readers. And these people come back. The average is, if you get a review, you've got maybe for every 100 reviews you've got about 10,000 readers, fans. It's about the average. So those people are all out there to buy, and they go after the second and third book, and I'm reading all his books, that kind of thing.
Are you going to write a memoir?
I don't know about a memoir, but I've got 3 more books that are coming along. One is about religion, which I'm really excited about. This fella down in the rural area has invented a new religion and built a church, which has caused the killer to take him out. We go into all why that happened. And another one about space travel, which I'm having a lot of fun with my fellow friends who are enthusiasts of all the physics of it, telling me it won't happen. It can't happen, Tommy. You can't fly that. You can't do that. And then I get into our little discussions. I say, well, I found a way you could do it. Oh, because you spend hours on researching this stuff. But that's the way it is with science fiction. And then I have a new one, the last one that I'm working on, which I think is going to be kind of fun. It's about a new race. And this race comes to the small town. This guy comes, and he's part of the new race that's going to sweeping the world. And it's a big study of what do the local people think about this new race. Do they want their children to marry him or her? Do they want to get involved? And this is in like today. So we get all the other race problems solved. Here's a new race. So it's an interesting story.
Tom, what's interesting about your Sunday River series is it's the same locale and problem locale, but you don't follow the same characters with the exception of maybe the preacher there that comes up. So it's a little bit different, each story.
That's
But
right.
the characters are very interesting.
Well, you know, they and the big writers in the past, Chekhov was a hero of mine, wrote a lot of short stories. And he said that you can't have anything in your story, whether it's a novel or a short story, it's not germane. So if I've got a character in there, there's something about him or her that has to do with the whole book, or he wouldn't be there. So you get kind of a taste of what's going on. And that makes it fun. If I think, you know, this is what keeps you writing these stories. Nobody writes today to make money. I can tell you that. I just read a study from the American Writers Association from a friend of mine who's done some critical work. And it shows that writers make a fraction of their income from writing. Writing is done because you care about your stories. As I said in the beginning, when we were children growing up, you could be a preacher or a politician. Well, writing is another way to be both. And you just do all that with words instead of an imagination and experience. And so you get a lot of pleasure out of entertaining people. And if you spend long enough at it, you get good at it. So people come up to you and say, yeah, did this really happen? Stuff like that, which are great compliments. But the characters are fun, I think. I came up in the 60s, so in those days, we were taught, and we all thought, that women and men were equal. Those were the days of unisex outfits. you know, which, by the way, in this next book, they have a unisex outfit that they wear. And that was part of the idea of women and men being the same. It failed with me. My daughter, I spent hours on trying to get her interested in space, which I thought was the great new future for children. And she stuck with Barbie, to my great dismay. But what can you do? But I think it's coming around now. It's beginning to take hold. That's a 60s idea that I think is making it. And Teddy Kennedy, or Robbie Kennedy was the big guy on that as a goal. So it's taking place. And so my stories about always have equal men and women heroes. They have a romance, obviously. They always have a romance. And there's always a good part, what, 3/4 of the way through the book. That's what you always used to know when you were a kid. Turn to the 3/4 of the way through and you find the good part. I try to fiddle with that a little bit. But the other thing I do in my books, which is a little different, is because of my great interest in animals and my wife's interest in animals. I have in every one of my books an animal that becomes part of the story. So there's usually it could be a Chesapeake dog, or in the one about the warboat, which is one of my favorite books, it's a cicada. I don't know whether any of you have ever seen cicadas, but they're a nasty nuisance. But they're interesting. And so that cicada follows the book right through to the end. Let's see, the one I'm doing right now is got a crow that follows this guy all the way through the book. The hero is a young man who's on his way home, just come home from Afghanistan with a shot up left leg. So he limps a lot. And strangely, he flies he's taught by the Air Force to fly these robot machines that go over and shoot somebody in a group of people. And they're all electronic and organized, very modern. And that skill and that background and his approach to life becomes a major part of the story. What do you call them? Not robots.
Zombies.
Drones. Drones.
Yeah, they fly over the enemy and fly
Drone.
with cameras and shoot him like that.
Tom,
Iranian.
do you have a favorite or favorites of your books?
I don't know. When I was writing this little essay up, I began to think, what is my favorite book? I mean, I grew up in the military Southern world of heroes and had them in my family and stuff. So I guess that would be part of it. But I think the ones, and of course, I always liked the women in the stories. So it's which was my favorite woman character. But I suppose the one about the little town defending itself against the Nazi submarine, that appeals to me more than anything else. I kind of, and then the last one about the ants, it takes up the idea of not small town bad guys like Trumpites or something like that, just real people who have to face a horrible crisis and with their own ingenuity can come up with a solution. And to me, that's so much a microcosm of the country. It's not a country of big government. It's a country of regular people figuring out how to keep it all going. So I think Warboat was probably the best book I've ever written.
What's a spell a title?
Warboat?
Warboat?
Yeah, Warboat.
Okay.
It comes from a tradition of World War II where they call these small boats warboats, and they build them subchasers were typical of that type of boat.
That's the one of the small town fighting off the Nazi submarine?
Yeah, warboat.
Are you influenced by Pat Conroy, who's from the same area?
Pat Conroy is a fantastic writer, and he's from North Carolina, I think. And he writes a different kind of story. There's another writer in Louisiana that a good friend of mine loves. They write a different kind of book. They don't get into the small village as much as I do. They tend to be heavily Southern. Maryland, where I grew up, was a mixed North and South. So I like to mix the two. But yeah, I like them. I like all these writers. My favorite writer today is John Sanford. Writes about small towns, writes about cities out in the Midwest, but he has an uncanny ability to think up incredible killers. And that's what I like to do. I like to think up new ways that somebody can be motivated to get after somebody else. I think that interests people. But you got to keep it simple, because there's this new show on television, Charisse, which as well written as it is, I think is very confusing. And I think you got to keep it very simple. Pat Conroy's got a lot of psychological stuff in his work. I don't get into that. To me, if you're going to have a man and a woman and a bad guy, it's got to be relatively simple for the average Joe to like it. If it's too complicated, he hasn't had the training to understand it. But that's just my opinion. So I write very simple stuff.
Bob, the
Pat
books meet
Pat
your
Conroy, I love. I mean,
criteria.
What, Peter?
The books meet your criteria for length for a book club.
They're under 200 pages?
No, a little more.
it's also
I'd like to ask a completely different question. How did you get into barefoot walking?
somebody said they were going to come up with that one. Well, I'll tell you, it's a fascinating sport. I'm on Facebook now with the Barefoot Walking Association, which is, believe it or not, a worldwide group. And if you ever look at my Facebook page, you'll see people calling in from Belgium or Russia or whatever. There seems to be a group of these people. They are people who like barefoot walking because it makes them feel good. And so I was a runner at one time, and then I began to walk because I had a growth of this arthritis around some of my bones, and it was not going to be good. And so walking would help to cut it back. And then as I walked, I began to read a lot about walking and found out this sport of barefoot walking, which was an attempt to get the feet muscles to work better at clearing up the bones of your legs and waist. And so I began to experiment with that and found that shoes did tend, in that kind of sport, to pound your heel and jar the bones of your legs. Barefoot walking did not. It transferred the weight of your walk and your gait to the ball of your feet, which took away the pounding of the heel. Well, after some experimenting, I found that the pain of my knees and my waist disappeared. The small back pain, it all went. And I attributed that to this philosophy. And also the fact that in many countries of the world, especially the lesser developed world, who I highly respect, most of those people walk barefoot. And they do not have all of these horrible leg and waist pains. They just don't have them, meaning that their walk and their gait is correct for the human body. Doesn't mean that your feet are going to be safe from lasts or anything. It just means that you're doing it right. So does that help you, Prue?
Yes, thank you.
You know, I'm always
Tom.
trying just the millennial things, but that's what it is. Is
Tom, I have a question.
that Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, who narrates your audiobooks?
Oh, good question. You go on, Audible has a program. Once again, if you want to write, you can do it for almost no money. All you got to have is good copy. So it's not like the old days where it's a cost a fortune. And all the money I put into writing when I started, believe me, I wish I had back because I made every mistake. But Audible has a program where they have all the narrators and you list your book and they try for it. And you can read their copy. And if you like them, you can offer them. The offer is share the royalties or give them a little money and partly share the royalties or pay them outright. I take the idea, share the royalties. So if you sell a book for, let's say 100 and you have a royalty of 40, they get 20. That's the way it works. So far, I've been lucky enough to get a very good narrator who's a SAG, part of SAG. He's an actor. He has incredible knowledge of the accents of the people where my books are written. Very good. He sounds just like the people. And his black characters, his women, they're all good. And he's worked with me on 3 books. And I've been very pleased, but that takes a certain amount of time you do to do it. Does that answer your question?
Very much so. Thank you.
All this stuff I've learned through years working with my friends at the Boston Writing Society, who are personal friends of mine. It was actually started as a Mensa group, a Mensa writing SIG, we call it. And the members, the full-fledged members, are all Mensa members. And we have a camaraderie. And we meet once a week. And if we get into a problem, there's enough brains around the table to tell you how to figure out this part of YouTube or how to do this in your ad or how to write this part. And that's just been a big help to me. It's kind of like having an agent who is dedicated. And of course, I always throw in a little bit at Christmas time or whatever to help them in their projects. One of my female editor, is very involved in women's rights. Does a lot of, all the money she makes from her books goes to help women. And my books, if I make any money, goes to help animals. So we're all more in the area of not trying to make a buck out of writing, because if you try to, you end up changing your book and you don't get to write what you want, which is what happens to a lot of people.
Tom, when you write a book, do you set aside so many hours a day to sit down and write, or do you do it when the inspiration moves you?
That's a good question. According to my wife, I spend all my time writing, which is very aggravating to her.
Except when you're walking.
Well, she's in nursing care now, so she doesn't.
No, except but you walk a lot. You walk a lot of the time.
But I'll tell you the honest to God's truth. Writing is really not that much time spent behind the computer, or in the old days, writing something on a script and trying to find somebody to type it up for you. It's spent in thinking. And I get up in the morning with my first coffee. And fortunately, I have an apartment which looks out to the east. And I get a nice sunlight most days. And Peter, I think you have the same thing on your little porch there. You can look to the east. And
So I don't.
Well, you read the comics then. I don't know what you do, but anyway, your wife brings you out to breakfast, which you're lucky you get a nice breakfast. But
I'm lucky if she'd bring it out.
Well, I've been walking close to the winter, hoping you'd invite me in for a bagel, but so far she hasn't volunteered.
We miss you on the hill.
For bourbon later in the day, but you.
That's right. That's true. I can bring. Anyway, but I find that a lot of the stuff in writing, when you sit down to write a scene, what I call a scene, I write 24 chapters in a book, and I took the idea of a 3-act play to organize my books when I finally got around to thinking it through. So my books have 3 parts. And each section has 8 chapters. And in each chapter, it has scenes. So when I'm writing it, I'll be working on a scene of several characters. What do they say? What are they going to do? What's the accomplishment of the scene? What is it building towards the tail end? And as a result, you can sit down there when you're figuring the thing out and spend a lot of mental time and make jotting notes in your journal about what they say in that particular scene. And the next day, you say, I'm tired of that one. I'll skip ahead to chapter 16 and do the same thing on another scene. That way you don't get stocked. That way you don't get stultified. But that's the way I write them. And of course, you start with a general idea of what you want to happen. Who's the killer going to be? How's it going to happen? And why is it going to happen? And then you put the characters around to see if they can figure out what it was. And these all go through these scenes. And I suppose I thought back in the beginning that someday I'd sell one of these to the movies, and they could go to the screenwriter and say, okay, here's act 1, 2, and 3. And the screenwriter would be able to pop it right out into a movie. Hasn't happened, but may never say die. But that's the way, how I write them.
Do you work with a storyboard?
I have all kinds of, right now, the storyboard I have for my new cartoon book is on my closet doors with a beaten path from there to my drawing board to take that last drawing and change it. When I finally get it the way I want it, I go over to my, I don't know what, some old program that I had, PageMaker, I think, or something, and put it into a page that my friends can manage a book out of. But that's the way I do with the storyboard. And that's the best way, because you can play with the thing and fiddle with it until you get it right before you ever go to something that's print worthy. Does that help you? I do storyboards more with cartoon books and stuff. And once again, all those things are a lot of cartoonists. And back in the days when I was really doing some cartooning, I got out of it because the magazines all went out of business and nobody bought them anymore except the New Yorker. And so the theory I came to after hours of using brush painting with sprays and all kinds of stuff, colored things, was that the cartoon itself is a line drawing as simple as you can possibly make it. And the real joke is what takes the time. So your net result in all that storyboard is to spend the time on what happens in words. When people see a cartoon in the New Yorker or whatever, well, maybe you don't, but what I do first is I look at the caption. If it's funny, I look up at the drawing, because the drawing is really irrelevant. Matter of fact, a lot of cartoonists do the same drawing over and over again, but it's the caption that gets you to laugh. In the cartooning books I used to read, the famous example was given of what is the great joke? What is the best joke? And it's a guy walking down the street slipping on a banana peel. People think that's funny. And the reason they think it's funny is because they know it didn't happen to them. And they like to laugh at the guy who it happened to. So as long as you can get that kind of caption, the rest of it's just scribbling some lines. The storyboard is not so much for lines, it's like the think part.
All right, Bob, last question.
Well, Tom, am I right in hearing you that you use the same format, the same formula for every novel?
No, I use the same structure of the book.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
The story is entirely different. The characters are almost always different unless I get a really good one that I like and I can use again. I also, like many writers, pick a region, because most, I don't want to say good writers because that assumes that I'm a good writer, but most writers pick an area of the country or the world which they know well in which they can talk about and give you a backdrop to the story. I do the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which happens to be, had its share of good writers. What's his name? The Chesapeake writer. I knew down in Maryland when he was writing that thing. Met him at cocktail parties anyway. Because of an M, I can't think of his name. But you have an area which you can get lots of good.
Not Somerset Maugham.
No, not Somerset.
M.
The guy wrote Hawaii. And
Oh, yeah.
anyway, he came down there, rented a house, and he and his wife, he wrote this book called Chesapeake. And
James Michener.
I remember being at a cocktail party, and I told him to start the book with the Canada geese. And I think he did, or maybe he got it from somebody else. But, you know, it's an area where you can pick up lots of stuff. And the Chesapeake, unfortunately, has been written about so much. And the stories that come out of there are so heavy with certain plot lines that when you're writing, when I write about them, I come up with plot lines that are entirely different, you know, than the normal stuff. And that's why I've had some success. But if you wrote about just the planters were nasty people and they beat their slaves and they all were on the side of the South in Civil War, that gets you nowhere. You got to massage it a little, put in some speedboats and stuff like that. Then people see something entirely different. And it's a very exciting area. Riding a Harley down those back roads is fun.
Well, Tom, you've given us a totally new perspective and a new dimension. And we really appreciate it. Thank you. It's wonderful, wonderful.
Well, I appreciate you guys listening to my spiel about being a writer.
Wow, it's really interesting and great.
Tom, we need you back up on the hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you all. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, Nancy and Mike.